Hi, my name is Deshaun Blunt. This is Shanna McCoy Rollins. And today we're going to talk to her about her family history and her native blood and being an aboriginal to this land. And we're going to talk about your father to start out. And let's go ahead and talk about your father. Show the viewers your family history and pictures, and we'll go from there, okay?
Great. Well, if you can see this, this is a picture of my dad.
Okay. Picture of him.
And this is a picture of my great-great-grandmother. That's his great-grandmother. And I have other pictures as well. Let me see here. It should be in that folder over there. Yeah. Try this one here. I think it was one of those. I put it in.
Okay.
No, try that one. I know it's one of them. Yes, here we go. This is a picture of me at age 4.
Okay.
Actually, 4.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And this is a picture of my grandma. This was taken in 1943. My father was 14 years old on that picture.
So this is your grandmother right here on this side, and this is your father?
And that's my uncles, and my aunt was 18 years old. She at the time, she was 19 years old.
Okay.
My grandmother was 47 when she had her last baby.
Wow.
So they called it, end of change baby. And so can you imagine being 47 years old, you already got, most of your kids are grown.
You got a little one. Huh?
And then this one pops up. This is my dad at age 21.
Looks like James Brown.
Yes, and actually people would come up and ask him if they could have his autograph, and he would kindly oblige.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, whenever my dad went somewhere, and this is a picture of me.
Okay.
Yes. That was at age 23 years old.
Beautiful.
And actually when people would come to my home, they try to steal this picture, so.
Very beautiful woman.
So I'm like, no way. And this is a picture of my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandmother. Actually, my great-grandmother in 1952, she had given a prophecy. And she had told the family, she never used the term granddaughter or anything, or grandson. She always used the terms daughters and sons. But she said that the work that was left undone in her hands, she said she foresaw a daughter coming. She said she's going to be feisty just like me. She's going to be very strong. She said, but the only thing is she's going to be dark complected, but she's going to look like me. And then I looked at her photographs, and I'm like, we do favor. Because people would question when I was growing up, where did I come from? You look foreign. And I'm like, I look like everybody else, I never really felt like I belonged. But mainly it was always kids from other countries I was like a magnet, especially to the Japanese kids. And I couldn't figure that out. And I would go home and I would tell my parents, I'm so tired of these foreign kids following me. And they were like, they look up to you. I'm like, but why? And then, like I said, when I got the result back, Japanese was part of the ancestry. And I had this major crush on Bruce Lee when I was little.
Bruce Lee.
Yeah, and I was into martial arts, and then when I turned 22, when I was in college, I took martial arts, karate, aikido, and judo.
Oh, sister kick some tail.
That's right.
Don't mess with her. She got thunder cookies.
I'm older now. So, but main thing, like I said, here's another photograph of me. I used to be a hair model, so I took pride in that.
Hair model?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, so, and I was in the marching band, played clarinet. I started out with one little song that first beginners always have to play is Mary Had a Little Lamb. And my mother would always say, is there another song you can play besides that one? I wanted to master Mary Had a Little Lamb. ended up getting awards, you know, and everything that I've done in my life, I wanted it to be pleasing first to the Most High. Second of all, everything that I've accomplished and achieved, I always looked at what my ancestors couldn't do. And my dad and my mother always told me, even from when I was your son's age, they would always tell me that I had a responsibility.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, why do I have to pile all these people on my shoulders? I am just one person.
Right.
And my dad, he would even tell me, you have more in your hands in order to become successful than your parents, your grandparents, your great ever could have done. And I would have the little pity parties coming up, and but why me? And my dad would say, why not you?
Right.
And I was like, okay, but he's like, didn't you know your grandfather only had a third grade education? I'm like, but what does that have to do with me? He's like, you have a degree, young lady.
Right.
And he said, that little school that you're going to, your grandfather couldn't even walk through the front doors. And it's because of him and your grandmother and the people who came before them. He said, you had two sets of ancestors. He said, God knows, because this family is so diverse, he said, but the two major ones that suffered were the Africans and the Native Americans.
Right.
And he was like, the native side, they were pushed on reservations. The Africans were slaves, came here on slave ships. It was illegal for them to learn how to read or write. And if they were caught reading, there was lashes or death.
Right. Wow. So with your father and your grandfather, what struggles did they have to go through at their time periods as natives of the land and being born to this?
Well, as I showed you this picture before, this picture was taken, my dad was 21 years old.
Right.
That picture, no one would ever believe that picture was taken when my father was in prison.
Wow.
And my dad, I would always say, Dad, you're bold, because my dad was charged with a crime he did not commit.
Wow.
So if they said you did something, there was no getting out of that.
No.
The first day of his arrival in I think it was Cummins prison, he told the warden, you know what, you may have my body, but you don't have my mind. And my dad told him, I will not wear the clothes of a guilty man. So what they immediately done, they had put my dad in total isolation.
Wow.
Total confinement for 3 months. Once he got out 3 months later, he asked my dad, are you going to wear these clothes and wear this number? My dad was like, I will not, because I did not commit that murder.
Wow.
And what that was about was my dad started riding horses when he was 13 years old. He was in the rodeo circuit. My dad was somewhat of a celebrity. So, like I said, once he got to a certain level and he saw that he was becoming successful, especially here in Northern Rock, the so-called whites were not going to let that happen, because my dad was going to be the next big break star. My dad was approached by movie producers that wanted to put him in movies, but the only setback was that my father didn't know how to read too well. So he always had a backup plan, and that was cooking. He became a chef. So what happened when the warden found out what my dad's skills were, he made an agreement. He said, okay, you won't wear the uniform or the prison clothes. My dad said, no, I will not. He said, well, okay, you know, once that 6 months was over and my dad was still in solitary confinement, it caused my dad to have this post-traumatic stress when it came to dealing with whites. It was a certain way, because he was born in 1928, where you had to bow down. You couldn't look whites in the eye. If you saw them walking on the sidewalk, you had to get off the sidewalk and allow them to walk on it.
Wow.
And me, born in 1969, we're talking about in the middle of the civil rights movement. My mother was like basically, as she referred to it, black nationalist, Black Panther. So coming from being raised by a strong mother, I was born with cerebral palsy. I had an infantile stroke in utero. Well, I was never supposed to read, write, walk, or talk. The doctors had told my parents to put me in a home. And my family was like, no. My parents told them, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to raise her, and she's going to, stay with us.
Right.
And my mother was like, when I get through my daughter, trust me, she's going to walk, she's going to talk, she's going to do everything that she's supposed to do in this life. I was placed in braces. Went through I've had over 33 operations.
Wow.
And supposed to have 3 other more, because I have a brain tumor, and it's in a location that cannot be touched.
Wow.
So that's another issue. And then I was born with a congenital heart defect, and I'm allergic to latex. So therefore, the anesthesiologists don't feel comfortable putting me to sleep. And I'm a hemophiliac, so they don't operate on hemophiliacs because you would bleed to death on the table.
Yeah.
So, but in spite of all that, going back to my father, looking what he went through, my father had liver cancer, and he was on chemotherapy pills. My grandmother had a heart condition. My grandfather had esophageal cancer. And I looked at all these people who had all these situations, and then my dad, we talked about it. Do you think that the slaves had a day off?
No.
They didn't. He said slave masters didn't write excuse letters or notes. Excuse me, please. And my dad was comical too, so that's how I got that sense of humor from him.
Right.
And he was like, "Do you think a slave master on a Johnson plantation would give this slave a pass to go to the Martin plantation if he got sick?" He said, "No. You had to work regardless."
Right.
The women who had babies, they didn't get a chance to lay up in the bed for a week. Those women had babies in the field. Once they had those babies, they still had to get out there and pick cotton. And my dad said, so, dear heart, guess what? No excuses.
Wow.
And I thought that was inhuman. He said, no, that's survival.
Right. That's straight survival. So, I remember you told me earlier about one of your grandfather or your dad being rejected off of the
my great-great-grandfather, his name was Renolos. The slave master had changed it to Reynolds. And so therefore he was a businessman, and that was in 1903, found documentation that his mother was Choctaw and his father was British, also Irish, German, and Canadian. With the Choctaw information, we really couldn't really pinpoint exactly, the ID number, but he knew. And like I said, back then, Native Americans really did not discuss their genealogy because they did not trust the United States government. So with my great-great-grandfather, he chose to sue the United States government for rejecting us. You had the Dawes Rolls, and the Dawes Roll was ran by so-called white men. And the term $5 Indian came into play because a lot of whites were paying to have their family members put on the Dawes Roll and excluding the Native Americans and the freedmen. That's how that even came into play. So with my great-great-grandfather, they kept rejecting him, and he kept fighting it. And they would interrogate him. I have his court documents, and they were asking him questions, and he refused to answer. So because he refused to answer, they asked him about his mother. They asked about his mother's language. They asked about his grandparents, and I have to commend that because he was under a lot of pressure. And back then during that time of history, you didn't have any rights. You weren't even really regarded as human.
No, right, and he was actually doing right, actually.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. I have another little question for you. As your grandmothers and your mothers and aunties, what native blood do they have, and what African blood have you came across?
Well, I recently got my results from 23andMe. And I have this here, 23andMe results. We found out on my mom's side, they're 83.2% Sub-Saharan African, 35% Nigerian, 16% Coastal West African, 7.5% Congolese, 1% Sudanese, and broad West West African, which is 13.5, Broad East South Congolese 1.5, and Southeast African 1.5, and Broad Sub-Saharan African 2.1. British and Irish, as they say right here, 6.5, would round that out to 30. It was actually 33%, and French and German 22%, and Broad European 1%. Indonesian and Thai, that was a shocker. I wasn't expecting to see that on that line, but then again, we were always teasing about the eyes, and I got teased a lot in school. People ask me, why your eyes look like that, you know, or they say, oh, you look Asian. I'm like, no, correction, Asians look like us. Because if you go back and look at the South Africans,
well, you got all
and the Khoisan tribe, you know, and like I said, broadly East Asian, that's your Eastern Indians. Scandinavian 18%, West African. I was kind of surprised by the only 12% West African. And then there's 2% Italian. And I was like, what? 2% Italian? That's on my mom's side.
That's your mom.
And then, like I said, they rounded up to African hunter and gather, only 10%. 6% Iberian. That's like, say for example, you know, that's part indigenous as well. Your Moors, Native American on my mom's side is 5%, and then 3% Eastern European and Ashkenazi Jew. I was not expecting that. The Southeast Asian, Indonesian, and Thai, that was like 1.2%. Scandinavian and Senegambian and Ghanaian 6.8. Some of my family came from Puerto Rico, Japan, Jamaica, Germany, Italy, Canada, Australia. They also came from Austria, Mexico, Barbados, Spain, Argentina, Aruba, Brazil, Croatia, Chechnya, United Kingdom, Ireland, Poland, and Spain. And I was not expecting that.
Right.
You know, it doesn't matter what you look like, it's what's in your blood.
Right. Yes. Another thing that I was liking to ask you, I remember talking to you the first time, meeting you at the Black Native American event in Little Rock. Dr. Littlefield, tell me the experience that you went through with him and how the whole scene was back in the day when you went to school.
Well, when I was a student at ULR, like I said, ULR was the school to go to. But back in the day, you can imagine this so-called African-American woman with these braids and turquoise and chokers, and I was really off into my heritage, and I'm still proud. But being the only woman of color in a Native American Studies class and being disregarded and being disrespected or not even acknowledged at all, and here you are bringing your pictures to show that this is what your family looks like, and somebody telling you that Native Americans had no relationship with Africans at all, you know, I'm like, no, I beg to differ. You know, or they would single out a Japanese student and say, by the way, you look more Native American than anybody, which I knew they were throwing out hints at me. Because here I am, 24 years old, 25 years old. I graduated in 96. I was 27 years old when I graduated from college. So you can imagine being Native American Studies major. And at that time, I did my internship on a reservation. Prior to that, like I said, in my early 20s, I was working for nonprofit Native American organizations. So I had years of experience. I worked with an organization called NACOA, Native American Coalition of Arkansas. I worked that job for 3 years. I was so dedicated, I didn't even get a paycheck. And to work somewhere for 3 years and not get paid, you know, that's the ultimate sacrifice. So my experience has been with 350 tribes.
Wow.
So when you have someone who has that type of expertise, the knowledge of the customs, the culture, the language, the foods, you know, then you disrespect someone like that, just putting them in so-called African American category or the black category. You know, I'm like, that's a slap in my face. That's a slap in my ancestors' face. Because again, who are you to tell me what a Native American should look like?
Right.
I'm like, you know, here's the thing. I come from two worlds, so I'm not going to check what you want me to check. I'm not going to allow you to put me in a box that I don't want to be in.
Right.
What if I want, like, okay, and I would write papers. We would have to do term papers, and one of them was, one of the papers that I wrote was Hollywood Savage. The second one was What Shall I Check?
Okay.
And Hollywood Savage, I talked about the B-rated Western movies, or how they had the so-called, you had your Charlton Hestons and all these different people, Kirk Douglas playing Native Americans with his dark makeup, and you have the women playing, you know, the so-called squaw, which I really never liked that term anyway.
Yeah.
But I know what it meant, but to throw that word around all the time, it was like something make always like, ugh.
Cringe, yeah. I always heard about all that history and all that. Another question that I was really wanting to ask you about is like, how did you get started on coming about with your tribe and starting your tribe here in Arkansas?
Well, what I did, like I said, at the time my aunt was still alive, and she and I talked quite frequently because she was in California, and she and I would always talk. And when I moved out there, the first year I've been visited was 1992 that year. And again, it was always the Puerto Ricans, the Dominicans, the El Salvadorians would always ask me, where are you from? I'm like, I was born and raised here. Like, no. I'm like, look, whatever you say, I'm just from all over. So I came back home and I said, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I changed my major to Native American Studies because acting was another thing that I really enjoy. And I contacted the Choctaw Nation. I contacted actually the Cherokee Nation. I wasn't really sure if my family was of Cherokee because all we ever heard was Choctaws. So I contacted them. I sent them my grandmother's information. At the time, I didn't have all the paper documentation. I just had the words, the stories. And I kind of left that dormant a little bit and started on another endeavor. But then something in me would not allow me to rest until I got all this documentation. And really, I just started getting all the documents back in 2015, actually 2016, 2017. And when I found all those documents on archives, I was like, I'm sitting there at the computer and I see my grandfather's name and I see my grandmother's name and I see my great uncle and my great grandmother and my great great grandfather, and I started screaming and I saw the name Rollins. Rollins is a German last name. And then a letter came from the Rollins Family Institute. The slave master was a George Rollins. And that's how I found that we were connected. So I contacted them and was like, look, I'm a Rollins. And they're like, no, wrong Rollins.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, wow.
I would feel like, hey, we the same kin, you know, you gave me your last name.
Thank you. So when I explained to the lady how my name became Rollins, I said, you have to really look. I said, somewhere down the line, someone in your family owned slaves. They were considered property. And what they did, they named those slaves after them. I said, but keep in mind, they took out income taxes on those slaves. I said, and when you take out income taxes on your property, guess what you get, dear heart? You get money off of that property. I said, and guess what? My ancestors were the property.
Exactly.
That's how we became Rollins.
Exactly.
And so the baby sister contacted me back because I went on Facebook and I was talking about how I auditioned for Tyler Perry, or I sent an application of my resume to be in one of his plays, and the baby sister, she called me back. Actually, she responded back to me on Facebook, hey cuz. I'm like, oh, we're cousins now.
Wow.
And she's like, well, I want to apologize for my sisters, especially if they've been older Caucasians, and they apologize, the younger siblings apologize for the older one. Well, you have to understand, my sister, she's older, and I'm like, there's no need to explain, I already know the mindset. But thank you for contacting me.
Wow. Yes. So my next thing to ask you about is really your books and all your future books that you're going to have out as well.
Yeah.
And let's talk about that as well.
Well, my book is Taking Control of Your Health, a Healthcare Guide for Patients. It's a book that helps patients navigate through the medical system, how to authorization to transfer your medical records, authorization to release your medical records, how many surgeries you may have had, medications that you're on, frequent tests that you may have taken, EKGs, colonoscopies, EGDs, things of that nature. So I just took my own experiences, having, like I said, I refer to myself as a professional patient.
Yeah.
Like I said, having had 33 surgeries. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
You know. And I just say, you know what, I would document how I felt, pain management journal. I would write that one, because doctors, whenever you go to hospital or you go to the ER, first thing they ask you on a scale of 0 to 10, what is your pain level?
Right.
So I would take notes, take them to the hospital with me or my doctor's appointment. I'm like, here, let's cut out time, cut down the time, so therefore you can know what's going on with me. So I said, okay, look like we got some here. It started out with just like a little personal thing. And my friend would come over at the time and ask me, so when is that book coming out? And I'm like, I'm not writing a book. She said, yes, you are. She said, your own experience could help somebody. And I said, well, I might think about it. And so she's like, well, I'm not going to leave you alone until it's in print. And I'm like, okay. So then years later went by, and I said, wait a minute. And my dad and I, we started talking about it. He said, wait a minute. He said, you know what? There is no excuse why you're in your predicament. I'm like, what do you mean by that? He said, because you have the keys to write your own success. And when he said that, it kind of like, made you a little aha moment.
Yeah.
And he said, first of all, he told me these words. He said, everything that you need in this life to become successful, God already packed your suitcase at birth. And I would have those moments of that why me God moment. And my dad was like, if I could write like you and speak like you, I wouldn't be broke.
Hey, now.
And I'm like, wait a minute. He has something here. He said, you got the opportunity to write out of your situation. You can write your own ticket. He said, that pen is your sword. And I'm like, say that again. He said, your pen is your ticket out. He said, if you want to stay broke, you stay that way. Or you can pick up that pen and write your way out. And I'm like, wait a minute. How could he say that to me? And he said, if you want to sit here and stay complain and tell me you don't have this, he says, but it's your own fault.
Wow. I heard that you was telling me about your cookbook that's coming out.
Yes.
Please do tell about that.
The Rollins Family Cookbook is called Rollins Family Traditions From Our Table to Yours. It's actually comprised of recipes that my dad cooked, because he worked for Ramada Inn for over 40 years. He's even cooked for presidents. He's even cooked for the Rockefellers. There was an incident one time when Bill Clinton came to town, when he was at in the White House, and he frequented this place, and my dad happened to be there working one day, and Bill was, elaborating on the food, talking about how good it was, and he wanted to meet the man responsible for that lovely dish. So they called my dad out, Mr. Rollins, the president wants to meet you. And my dad